Hello, my beautiful bookish people. In this video, I'm going to talk about my favorite books of 2020. And I have many, many notes. First, I want to start by saying that the star rating system that I use for myself to make this list is completely subjective. I've only picked what I've marked as my 5-star reads this year, and out of those, that just means how many times I would think I would reread the story. So that's just partially me mood reading and partially me just really liking a book. It doesn't mean that the other books that I read last year that didn't make this list are bad. It just means that I don't see myself rereading them quite as often as I do the ones on this list. So let's get started. According to my notes, I read approximately 177 books last year, and I say approximately because I read a lot of graphic novels which were in volume format, and some of which were in individual issue format, so I don't really know what to tell you there. Just know that I had a grand old time reading last year, and stay tuned to the end of the video to hear what my #1 favorite was. So last year I started keeping a master spreadsheet of what all I was reading in some categories and stuff, which will be covered in another video. But I basically had it auto-sort these things for me by rating, which you know is already 5 stars, and then by month, I think. So that's the order that I'm using, is whatever the spreadsheet spit out to me. These aren't like particularly ranked in the order that I'm giving them. First up, in January, I started reading the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan. If you haven't heard of this series and you like epic fantasy novels, then I'd recommend you check it out, but be prepared to spend a lot of time dedicated to this series because there are a total of 15 books. Of those 15 books, I think I've read 9 or 10 of them so far, and I've been really enjoying the series, but for some reason I took a break in the middle of reading it and never got back to it for some reason, even though I really like it. So I still haven't finished it yet, and that's now one of my goals for 2021. Next, we have The Tea Dragon books by Katie O'Neill. I'm still waiting on my pre-order of the hardback version of the 3rd book in this series, which hopefully will arrive at my door in June of this year. But these are wonderful short graphic novels that incorporate LGBTQIA, disability, and fae diversity. Did I mention how beautiful the art is? The art is adorable. The story is cute and short, and it's basically for all ages. I mean, maybe a real little kid wouldn't get into it because, you know, maybe a little bit larger words, but I bet they'd appreciate the art. I love these books so much, and I can totally see myself rereading them many times. Next, we have the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. And I need to make a whole dedicated video or video series to this series because it's so good. But if you want to know my thoughts as I was reading the first book in the series as I was reading it, you can check out my blog post about it, which I'll link down in the description. Next, we have Snug by Katana Chetwynd, aka Katana Comics. I've been following her work for years now, and I'm really glad she published this book. As always, it was adorable, and reading her work always makes me feel like I'm getting a warm hug or drinking a warm cup of tea or something. They're adorable and a good pick-me-up. Next is the Aurora Cycle books. There are currently 2 in this series by Jay Kristoff and Amy Kaufman. I would say that if you're looking for a fun YA take on something extremely similar to Star Trek, you're gonna have a fun time with this series. And yes, the authors are very aware of the similarities and even make a load of references to The Next Generation and Voyager. However, if you're already a bit of a sci-fi buff, you might feel like these books are a bit stale. Next up is the Skyward series by Brandon Sanderson. I'm really hoping the third one in this series comes out this year. I will say I am slightly more excited for the Skyward series than the Aurora Cycle books, but that's just personal preference. And this is another one of those series that scratches my YA sci-fi itch. I haven't read any stories similar to it before, so it's a bit more refreshing than the Aurora Cycle books, hence why I'm a little bit more excited for them. And also, if you're looking for a strong female lead and the phrase doomslug makes you happy, then I'd highly recommend checking out this series. That's all the explanation you're going to get from me. Next, we have The Enchanted Forest Chronicles by Patricia C. Reed. This is a middle grade fantasy series that stars several characters who each get their own book. I think I most enjoyed the first book in this series that once again features a strong female lead who breaks most social norms, at least those which are in her world. Well, technically this would be the second book that was published and the first book in the series chronologically. The original book was written in the 1980s, and it was so popular that the publisher convinced the author to develop more of her world, which was then published in the 90s. I have no idea how I didn't grow up with these books in my household, but I'm definitely glad I picked them up last year. Next, we have Hair Love, which is a children's graphic novel by Matthew A. Cherry. The message is wonderful. The art style is adorable. Everyone needs this book in their household if they're remotely interested in hair. Next is another graphic novel, Nimona by Noelle Stevenson. If you're looking for a fun YA story centered around a couple of anti-heroes, you should totally check this book out. I just wish it was longer or had its own series, something that the author has said that most likely will not happen, which makes me very sad. Next is Dune by Frank Herbert, which is an adult epic sci-fi series. I've only read the first book so far. When I found out it's being turned into a movie and was also getting a gorgeous special edition re-release, I knew I had to have it. Herbert throws you directly into his world from page one, so don't expect to really start comprehending what's happening until you're at least a third of the way into the book. The world building and political intrigue is rich, but the beginning of the book will almost give you whiplash while trying to keep up with everything from the very beginning on the first read through. I haven't reread it yet, but I have a feeling it's one of those books that seemingly gets better the more times you read it since you start noticing more and more details. Next, we have the Manga Classics adaptation of Pride and Prejudice by Stacey King. If you have issues getting into the writing style of classics but still want the gist of the story, I'd highly recommend checking out the Manga Classics version. The adaptation does take a lot of sly wit out of the book, meaning it's not nearly as present because of how condensed the story is. However, I think it makes up for this lack in graphic humor because there are just some things that you can do in graphical content that are really difficult to do just with words on the page. And if you want to know more of my thoughts of this book, you can check out a couple of my videos from my 2020 Reading Rush series. Next, we have Saga by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. I ended up reading all of the series that is so far published, which according to the authors, I believe is supposed to be the first half of what they have planned for the series. These are adult graphic novels, and they are graphic in all three senses of the word: medium, maturity, and explicit in covering semi-taboo topics. And oh my word, is it amazing at what it does. If you're looking for a sci-fi fantasy series that covers hard topics while weaving in some dry humor, then you'll definitely want to pick up Saga. Did I mention there are space cats? Lion Cat might be my favorite character, well, and Gus. Gus is pretty great too. Next is So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijeoma Oluo. It is exactly what it sounds like, and it is a fantastic resource that everyone should just read. Next, we have Fangs by Sarah Anderson. It's a graphic novel about a love story between a vampire and a werewolf. Need I say more? I think not. Next up is Not My Father's Son by Alan Cumming. Let's just say that a lot of this book resonated with me, and if you're looking for a great audiobook memoir that covers mental and physical abuse from a parent, you'll probably want to check this out. Next is the Lightbringer series by Brent Weeks. If you're looking for an epic fantasy series with great world building that isn't nearly as detailed as The Wheel of Time, yet is detailed enough for people who love all the details, then you should check this series out. It features a magic system based off of light, so cool, rainbow magic. In the first book, the main character is quite verbally abusive to himself for a few reasons, and as the series goes on, the character does experience some growth around these things, but it was a bit heavy-handed in the first book for me, so you might want to check out the content warnings before checking this series out. But I really enjoyed the series as a whole. Next, we have the first two books in the David trilogy by S.A. Chakraborty. I don't know why I haven't read the third one yet. I have the audiobook and the ebook. I just need to go back and reread these two books first because I didn't get a copy of the third one for too long after I read the first and second, and now I feel like I forgot stuff and I need to reread it. Anyways, imagine Napoleonic Egypt fantasy fan fiction, which then turns into fantasy political intrigue. At least I think that's a good short way to explain it. There's a lot going on in these books, and they are addicting to read. Once I finally got into it, I could not put it down. And I really need to go finish the third one, so that's another 2021 goal. Next is The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. When I first picked it up, I was confused when I checked the Goodreads classification since it was listed as children's, middle grade, and young adult fantasy horror. Interesting choice. Well, we end up following the life of the main character from infancy to young adulthood. Aha, it makes sense now. In order not to spoil the book, I'll tell you that the book description is quite accurate. So if you're looking for a spooky graveyard fantasy read, definitely check out this book. Next is Avatar: The Last Airbender, The Shadow of Kyoshi. This is the second book of the two Kyoshi novels by F.C.E. The first book was good, but I definitely enjoyed the second book way more. If you haven't already watched Avatar: The Last Airbender, then, and by that I mean the show, not the movie, which we do not name, you won't need it to keep up with what's going on in these books. So if you are a huge fan of the show, this is a fantastic expansion of the world and character lore. And if you haven't seen the show yet, this is a good introduction to it. And if you like the books, you'll definitely like the show. And for my last book on this list, because I read it in December, is The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. The book description for this is extremely accurate. If I were to add anything to it, I'd say imagine A.A. Milne, Neil Gaiman, and Pixar made a book baby. That would be this book. It was wonderful. And finally, if I had to pick my all-time favorite book read for 2020, the number one slot would definitely go to the Broken Earth trilogy. I have a feeling that Jemison is going to be an auto-buy author for me. At some point, I really need to make a review video dedicated to this series, which I've already said, which will probably happen the next time I reread them. Who knows when that will be? Hopefully this year again? I don't know. after my number 1 slot, things start to get really complicated for me to pick a number 2 and 3, so I don't think I'll even bother trying. All of these books on this list I thoroughly enjoyed, but the Broken Earth trilogy is some next level stuff. It's just so glorious. And if you've made it this far into the video, let me know in the comments what your favorite reads were last year, or what you're really looking forward to this year, or both. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye!